Hello and welcome to today's episode of Financial Fluency. Today I had the fantastic Tess Wicks from the Words and Money podcast. Tess had me on her show quite some time ago and I loved hanging out with you, Tess. We actually did an extra long episode that turned into 2 episodes, didn't we?
Yes, you're my only 2-part episode, so you are extra special.
That was awesome. And I'm so happy to have you over here. I've been hanging out with you in a video challenge. So I got to see 30 days of videos that Tess did, and she is fantastic on video. She's doing her podcast on video as well as the iTunes podcast. And you should all go check out the Words and Money podcast. Now, Tess, how did you arrive at the name Words and Money?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually sometimes hate the name, and then I sometimes really love the name. I go back and forth so much. But at the time when I was starting my podcast, I wanted to just kind of create a platform that took all the things that I did in my life, which was write and talk about money, and put it together. So that's kind of how I got to Words and Money. Really pretty simple. I was like, if anyone asks me what I do, I can just be like, words and money. That's what I do.
I like it. It really resonated with me because I like writing as well, and I like talking about money. So I was like, this sounds perfect. I love it.
Yes. Well, thank you.
And I'd also like to talk to you about how you got into this, because you are a bit younger than a lot of the other people that are in the financial space, this financial media space particularly. So tell us about that. How did you arrive at this place?
Yeah. It started, so I went to school for finance. I actually went to school to become an actuary, which is like finance and statistics on crack. And when I was in school doing finance, I recognized that I had a really hard time kind of keeping pace with my male counterparts, which was the majority of everyone in my class. Mainly because I had a lack of confidence and kind of like didn't follow my intuition really about what I knew about money. It always seemed like the guys kind of knew everything. And I think that's just the difference between men and women, is guys really stand in their ground and they're like, I know everything about this stuff. And I was like, I don't know anything about taxes or insurance. And although we were learning about it, there were a lot of times where like, I don't want to raise my hand in school because I felt like it was a stupid question, right? So I went into the working world, and I realized again that a lot of personal finance things we just don't talk about. We don't learn about them in school. I didn't even learn about them in school. And I was like, if I have questions about these things, I know a lot of my peers probably do too. And I really wanted to, my podcast is also primarily for women because I wanted to speak to that demographic. I wanted to say, even though guys act like they know everything, they don't always know everything. But also, I wanted to speak exactly to that person because there's a lack of, the entire financial industry has a really bad way of communicating and marketing to women. So I wanted to kind of fill that gap. And being so young, I felt like I could just kind of bring the look, retirement is cool, even when you're 25, kind of teach to it too. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. I just wanted to fill a hole that I saw in the space.
Mm-hmm. I actually had a conversation the other night with one of the girls who works with my kids. My kids both have autism, so we have respite and hab workers. And I don't remember exactly how it came up, but I basically told her to start a Roth IRA right now with her earnings. She's still in college. She's studying to do special education. And I started kind of explaining how awesome a Roth is, how even though it's after tax, you're not saving on your taxes right now, you're probably in your lowest tax bracket you'll be in your life, knock on wood, right? Hopefully you'll keep earning more and more as you go on through life. And I was thinking about, no one ever mentioned any kind of retirement account to me while I was in college. No. And not even after college. And, I think it is such a great space for you to be filling right now. Because I feel like, especially since the 2008 recession, which I just realized the other day is 8 years ago.
I know.
I was like, wow, we're 8 years out from that. It still feels very big to me because it was a very big moment in my financial life. But But coming out of that, people who've, gone to college, graduated since that, I feel like there is a real sense of needing to understand and know what's going to happen with your money more.
Yes.
When did you graduate?
I graduated college in 2013. So I actually graduated high school during the recession.
Okay.
Which I wish I would have been like, Mom, Dad, let me start investing, because that would have been prime time to just like put money in the market.
Yeah.
But I wasn't quite there. I think my brother graduated, but so people that are in my position, the younger end of the millennial generation, or maybe probably middle, I guess younger would be like if you're born in 2000.
Wow, 16 years old right now.
Yes, exactly. But more of the middle end of the millennial generation, we grew up with either siblings or just watching our parents go through the recession, which makes us just very afraid to take that risk, because we don't understand quite yet how the market works. Like, we haven't experienced that. We've experienced, when we started really comprehending money, we've experienced that great downfall. And now we see it climbing, but we're not really sure what it's going to do. We're just like, it's going to crash again. That's all we can think about. My brother, who had probably just graduated or just started his job, then lost his job. And he's on middle to older end of the millennial generation. And so he had lost his job. So I saw that happen. And I think he also is very, very risk averse to not necessarily making decisions with investing his money, but more so with his job and his security with what he wants to do. So it's interesting how it differs between my behavior with finances. I'm more risky with my job, but I typically should be less risky with like my investing, whereas my brother is less risky with his job, more risky with investing.
That is interesting. And I'm like, as you were saying that, I was thinking through sort of the male-female dynamics overall. And I feel like because so many women do leave the workforce for a period of time during childbearing years, not that everyone does, but quite a few do, or at least take some time out. In some ways, traditionally, women are more risky with their career path. I mean, a lot of women end up exiting the workforce altogether for a period of time, and it's very hard to get back in. It's hard to get back to the earnings you were making before. Whereas men traditionally stayed in jobs for longer periods of time. I'm not sure I've not seen statistics on millennials if women job hop more often than men. I have no idea. I may have to look that up.
I haven't looked into that either, but that would be interesting.
But I have seen some statistics on women entering the self-employed, freelance, and entrepreneurial workspace in the last several years, that's really growing at a very fast pace. And I am interested in you leaving your actuary job to move into being self-employed. What was that like for you?
That was really hard. I always knew that I wanted to dabble in the world of self-employment and entrepreneurship, but I never could quite figure out how I was going to go about it, because being an actuary, I was really like, I have this great job security. They treat me really well. Like, I need to prove myself in this field before I move on. But it got to a point where I just didn't like the career path that was ahead of me. And I figured, I was young enough, I didn't have any dependents, and I was getting to a point where my salary would have become very comfortable if I stayed. And I didn't want to get comfortable before having to make a really uncomfortable decision. So I decided to make the decision first. And because I didn't lose my job in the recession, I didn't have a job in the recession, I kind of come from the space of knowing like, well, I can always go get a job. Whereas I don't think my brother would have that same mindset, especially when he was my age. So for me, my personal experience was just, I have to take the leap now before I get too comfortable or have people relying on me to make an income for them instead of just trying to keep myself afloat.
Mm-hmm. So did you give yourself some runway and some savings for how did you do it? How did you walk us through your mental process as a young person leaving a job to become an entrepreneur?
Oh, it's so funny because I don't have the best like planning strategies because I am just a hoarder of money. Meaning I've just always had a pretty high amount in my savings. But I guess
that's a great habit.
yeah.
Cash is king, you know.
Yes, exactly. I have nothing to say for that except that when I was in, I think it was like 5th grade when I started babysitting, I would take all of my money and put it in a Winnie the Pooh pencil case and put it under my bed. Even the checks that the person's mom would write for me, I would take the checks and put them in my pencil case and put it under my bed. So like months later, my mom had to approach me and be like, Tess, where are those checks that you've been hoarding under your bed?
You wouldn't cash them.
So I've always just kind of been naturally like that, like saving money. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have quite the strategy. I just knew that I really wanted to have like at least 6 months of runway for me. So I calculated that myself, just looking at my basic, how much it cost me to live, kind of the bare minimum, and then how much on top of that to live my lifestyle, and calculated that per month, and then multiplied it by 6 and looked at my savings and said, I have enough. I think I'm ready. That's pretty much how it went down.
That is pretty incredible. So what was it like to start your own business?
Scary and hard, but it's been fun. I don't know. It's so different, and it's such a transformation. Mm-hmm. And I think it's been a little over 1.5 years now, and I'm still kind of going through the motions of being comfortable with not having someone else tell me what to do, or being comfortable with not having to work 8 hours every single day, or if I'm not as productive as, like, if I don't, I try to track my time, and if I don't clock 8 hours a day, like, that's okay, because what we don't realize is how unproductive we really are in the workplace. And so getting comfortable with things like that feel like luxuries, even though they're really just part of the human existence, and we just don't realize it.
You know, I saw a study recently, I think it was Norway, where they're going to the 6-hour workday because they did those time and motion studies. And they said that people who stay at work for 8 hours a day do not get more done than people who stay at work for 6 hours a day.
It's so true.
Yeah, you basically, if you stay 2 more hours, you end up wasting 2 hours in the shuffle.
Yeah, I have a friend that used to work in budgeting for a massive company based in Germany, but she did like the financial budgeting in the US, and they would estimate for the salaries of the people, they would estimate like 20% of unproductive work time, and that's kind of how they would set their budgets and then figure out salaries. They include the fact that you're not going to be productive for a certain amount of hours.
And yet they still want you to clock in for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I'd rather come in an hour late, leave an hour early, and the only thing is, like, would you get paid? I wonder if they're paying people for 6 hours instead of 8 hours, but I'm like, if they're getting the same amount done that they were getting done before, productivity wise, hopefully they would keep their salaries the same. You don't want to suddenly take a big hit if you have a family to support and everything. Right. So I wonder if they're just assuming that they're being as productive as they were in 8 hours, but giving them 2 hours off.
Yeah, I think that there's something to say with like the 80-20 rule, like, what is it? Is it
Pareto's?
Work? Oh. Well, it's Pareto's principle, but 20% of your workforce is doing like 80% of the work, or the revenue generating work. So it's like
your pea pod plants, 20% of the pea pods, 80% of the peas.
Right. And it's the idea. So if you look at a business and you're like, okay, you need to fire this many employees or whatever, then it's not only just like getting rid of employees, but increasing the salaries of the employees that are going to be picking up the work to help them with that, like, oh, I'm going to be taking on more work, but I'm also valued more because I have like high value time. And I think that's a big mistake that a lot of corporations make, is they're like, just get rid of these employees and then decrease these employees' salaries, or they decrease everyone's salary. And
yeah,
there's so much mess in it, but I think if you can do it strategically. So it's like, we'll cut you to 6 hours. We expect you to be more productive. Here's a raise for that productivity or something.
Yeah.
Kind of reverse engineer.
If only the world worked that way. I think it should. If you and I ran the world, we would run it that way, I think.
We would run it that way, yeah.
So with your business, I've already mentioned that you do the Words of Money podcast, which is fantastic. Tell us about the rest of your business, what services you offer.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've been making somewhat of a pivot in my business. I originally started primarily focusing on personal finance, but becoming a business owner has really intrigued me into helping other business owners manage their business finances. Mm-hmm. And I work primarily with online entrepreneurs and people that are where their business finances and personal tie into each other or bleed into each other. So it tends to be kind of a mixture of both, but I have really started to kind of change my concentration, just because pulling from my background, I love analyzing trends and looking at data, and you can get a lot more of that from the business standpoint and making financial decisions based off of strategy and whatnot. And I know that you have read the book Profit First, so I am becoming a Profit First professional. And
are you? That is
some of their
that's fantastic.
Some of their methodologies in my coaching as well.
That is great, because actually I've thought of that a few times. I've listened to it on audiobooks several times, and one of the things I thought of was like, it's pretty cool that they have this, you can have a profit first accountant or a profit first professional who looks at things that way. And I was like, where I can find one of those. Now I know. Okay, Tess Wicks, are you in the process of getting certified or whatever?
Yes, I am.
Okay, that is awesome. I'm sorry. I think a Bing may have did you hear a Bing?
I didn't hear a Bing.
Oh, good. Okay, maybe it was just on my side. We'll edit that bit out about the Bing. A Bing just came through my computer. I thought I turned everything off. Somehow text messages are still binging. But that is great. Yeah, because I am not a financial professional of any kind myself. So I always look for great financial professionals to send people to. So now I know for people who want to do Profit First, I can send them to you, which is fantastic.
Yes.
Because I can tell people to read the book, and I can say how I've tried to implement parts of it. I have not fully implemented it, and I would like to more fully implement it myself. I think it's a great way of looking at business income.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. That's how I got into it, actually. I've read the book, and then I had a friend approach me and be like, hey, I need your help. I know you don't really do this. You work more with personal finance, but I figured you could probably help me. And I just said, have you read Profit First? And you could walk through their system and implement it. And she's like, yeah, I've read it, but I want to focus more on the sales and marketing and innovation and strategy in the growth space. And she's like, I want someone else to come in and handle these things. And what I've noticed also through implementing it is it really takes someone to come from the outside and make sure you are going through the process, because it's such a change in behavior, because you're literally putting your business on a budget. And you're doing things differently than what we've always learned to do. Making sure that you're saving first and you're allocating money in a different way. So it really is a behavioral change that usually it can be very helpful if you have someone else kind of walking you along that path.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Because like I said, I've done partial implementation of it. I have a tax account, I have a profit account, I have an operating account, and prepare self-salary. But the further steps of it and the actual checking on everything all the time. I keep our taxes good, but now I'm like, that's about as far as I got with it, was just setting up the separate accounts and transferring money into the separate accounts. But, he goes to more complex levels. He has his vault. He ends up doing more accounts. And I do have to admit, the first time I read it, I was like, this sounds so complicated with so many accounts, but it really is, just like on the personal level, I love having a spend account separate from the bill pay account for our household stuff. So I know I'm never endangering our mortgage or our bills in any way by what I spend. And having that for the business is great too. But I did want to bring something up that someone asked me the other day and see what your response is. So you're in the same sort of entrepreneurial world that I'm in a lot of groups, I think. And we see a lot of people talking about investing in their business. And the other day, someone asked me, okay, so how do I know when to really, I really want the big growth. I really want to go big guns. How do I know when to really go into debt to take my business to the next level? And what do you say when people ask you things like that? If they want to take on $10, $20, $30,000 of debt to do some big program promotion, something, a big launch.
Yeah, I think that it highly depends on their strategy with their business and, how they plan to monetize that so that they can pay off that debt. If they don't have to take on that debt and they can save proactively, that would be awesome. I'm always like, avoid debt as much as possible if you can. But of course, like you said in my podcast episode, that debt is a tool. It totally is. And so it just making sure that you're taking on the right amount of debt and that you recognize what your payoff strategy is going to be. And maybe even testing the market before you really go big on it. Mm-hmm. So it totally depends what you're using it for. If it is marketing and promotion, you need to make sure you're going to see that return on this sort of debt leveraged investment before you really dive head first. You could test it with just a little bit of,
like a pilot program of it.
Exactly. I'm like thinking of like Facebook ads or something for some reason.
Right. I mean, if it is marketing, you can run small tests to see your conversion rate to then extrapolate, hopefully, what it'll be. I do want to qualify one thing. I did say debt is a tool, but I also compared it to a tool like handcuffs that you can get locked into and not have a key to get out of. So, yeah. Well, and when the person... It was on an episode of all the stuff that I recorded recently. And I got a little off track because I ended up kind of going through the history of debt in the United States, how after World War II, we kind of came in with this idea of the 30-year mortgage for homes. And it really wasn't until late 50s, early 60s when there started being any kind of consumer credit card type debt. And then we had the savings and loan problem in the 70s and 80s. And, just like there was a time when individuals really didn't have much debt except maybe to a store that they bought things at, a particular merchant or vendor or something. It's really just been in the last half a century and 50, 60 years that people have started taking on a lot of debt. And I actually think it's been our country's way of distracting people from the fact that wages have been stagnant for so long. It's like they let us take on all this. We have all these tools that we can continue to kind of increase our lifestyle without actually making more money, but we're kind of gently sinking into this level of not everybody, but a lot of people being in a general state of debt all the time.
Yeah, that's interesting that you point that out with wage stagnation.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's like they keep offering more and more for us to use without really educating us on what the consequences are.
That'd be bad business for them.
Right, exactly. That's where we come in.
Yeah. So I'm not completely anti-debt by any means. I have used it in my life too, but I feel like most of the people who come to talk to me, that's one of the problems. I
think it's just important to make sure you don't look at it as kind of a band-aid or something to get you to the next level. You need to, I'm all about like looking at the numbers and looking and testing the market and see what you can do there. And so that's the hard thing is a lot of people want to take a shortcut to find the solution. And if you can slow down and take a look at, do you really need this? Is this the right move for you? Is it the right move to take on debt to get to that next level? If you can slow down and really look at that and make a better decision based off of, strategy, then you'll be better off. Then you may very well be prepared to take it on. But there's not like you have to be at this level of business or you have to have done such and such work. You have to think about what's right for you and what you can handle.
Okay, so the equation that you have, gross revenue minus expenses equals profit, where a lot of us figure out if we have profit at the end of the year after we've, our accountant has gone through everything. Whereas the profit first way, he said, gross revenue minus profit equals expenses. And if you don't have enough money for those expenses, you either have to cut expenses or increase revenue by raising prices, offering more, finding some way to make it work rather than sacrificing the profit, because then it's not a profitable business, right?
Totally. And there's like two major things that come into play. First is we believe that we need to be spending all this money on our business because it's like, I kind of equate, I've never had children, so maybe you can add to this, but like when you have a business, you look at it as like, I need to keep this business going. I need to go into debt for it. I need to spend this money on it. And often we overspend on things, or we, make payments on a car that we personally wouldn't buy, but the business could buy for us, right? Or we have all these kind of like inflated lifestyle things that happen to be business expenses that don't really need to be happening. And then the other thing is we are often, and especially with women, and this is part of one of the things that I'm really excited to be offering is helping women with pricing their services and figuring out a great way to price their services, because we still tend to underprice ourselves. So I think that with the movement of women becoming more self-employed and being more entrepreneurial is awesome, because then you can kind of like fight the whole equal pay thing. We also need to stand in our value and make sure that we're pricing ourselves equally as well.
Yeah.
It can be really, really hard because especially when it gets into becoming your own boss and having to put a price on it, then you tend to attach that to your self-worth. And it's really hard to draw a line there and say, they're not paying for like me as a human being emotionally, even though they could be, but you have to be able to draw that line and not take it personally if they're like, you're way overpriced, because you need to know. And the other thing that we really do in the coaching is helping people niche so that they can become that expert, so they can become the brain surgeon instead of the general practitioner. And that can help with increasing that revenue. So
yeah, that's true. Specializing, becoming a specialist usually does help, because then you have a very particular service that you can offer to people.
Yes. So all of those things in place, you can keep your profit non-negotiable.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it. I need to work on some of these things myself. I'll admit it right now.
I think we all have some work to do on all fronts. It's hard to make it all work.
Yeah, and thinking about it in terms of the pay gap, it's true. We can be part of the problem, especially if we are our own boss and are still, then we don't have anyone to sue. We don't have anyone to blame. There's no recourse when you set your own prices if you're setting them too low. But we can also more easily give ourselves a raise by raising them.
Exactly, which is why I think it's so awesome. We just need to make sure we're charging that.
Yeah, that sounds good. So do you have a group that people can join, or is there?
Not yet. I wish I did.
Okay.
I am not as organized as I want to be, but I do have, so Words and Money has a Facebook page that you can like, and then I'm really active on Instagram. It's just Tess_Wicks, and my website is Tess Wicks. So everything is like self-branded, and I'm going to start piecing it out as I get more defined between the personal finance and the business finance stuff. But it'll probably all bleed together just like our finances do.
Yeah, it totally does. Well, and I think particularly for women who are self-employed, who have left a W-2 type job and are, working towards building a bigger business, I think there's a lot of time where it ends up being very blended for women. Well, maybe for men too, but I think particularly for women, it takes a while to be like, I am a business, I'm incorporating, I'm, getting the business account, I'm doing all of those things. I see a lot of women hesitate to take those steps that really separate out the business entity.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that?
Yes. I think it's interesting because I think a lot of women are actually very good at managing their finances and they just don't recognize it. As far as separating it, I guess I can't say that I've noticed one way or another, but from personal experience, I have, you don't really say like, oh, now I'm a business, like someone pays you and you're just like, oh, I'll get that goes in the bank. You don't really sit down and go, oh, I'm a business. Crap, I need to start treating myself like I am one and treating my business like it's one. And it just takes some time. The other thing is like setting up these vehicles, opening up a business bank account. It's not that hard, but we tend to make it a bigger deal than it is. And you don't have to incorporate before you have a business bank account. You don't have to incorporate before you start selling yourself as a business owner. You could just set up a landing page and say, hey, check out my landing page and sign up.
Yeah. I actually think it's good to do that.
Yeah.
Because I have an experience that I'm going to admit here. There was a business I did with a partner where we were developing an app, and it was a very particularly niched app, and it was the creep, the scope creep, how that can happen in projects. Like you start with one idea and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So it was for children with autism, and we had all these ideas about the data collection and reporting to agencies and all this stuff. So it ended up turning into this project. We spent 2 years on it, and we did incorporate, we set it up, we got business bank accounts, we figured all this stuff out, we got interest from clinics and different places that were interested in it. But neither of us were an IT person, and neither of us were doing it full time or focusing on it fully. And after 2 years, when we realized how much more of an investment we needed to make to get it up to iTunes standards at that point, like there'd been 2 iOS updates in the meantime, all these things had happened, we finally called it a day and gave it up. We were like, it was kind of a labor of love, but and I was like, I wish we hadn't incorporated, and I wish we hadn't gotten the bank accounts until the thing was done and we could fully do it. But we wanted it to look serious for the clinics that we were approaching. And we were
a little tip for wanting to look serious is just like create a fake email address and have an assistant. That's my one tip. And then what was the other one? I can't remember the other one right now, but like you just have to like do these really easy, low barrier, serious things.
I know. It was a good learning experience for me. I learned a lot. And but now I do encourage people to go ahead and make some money first. Like consider your PayPal as your separate account for a while or something, do it that way before you actually take all the legal and financial steps if you're going to, in terms of, because the business bank account we had, it did cost us some money. There were some fees associated with it. So I was like, oh, we actually ended up in the hole, not only for the developer and different things like that, but then we had these bank fees for quite a few months with, hardly anything in the bank. So live and learn.
There are low cost business banking options these days. I mean, they're becoming more and more prevalent. And then otherwise you could just open up, like I just started with a separate savings account or a separate checking and savings account because I use Ally Bank and they allow you to open up as many as you want. So I was like, no, this is my bank account and this is my bank savings account. And now I have a bajillion bank accounts and savings accounts and checking accounts, but that's all about the profit first stuff that comes into play.
I know, me too. Sometimes I've been asked a few times about what accounts I use and what banks I like and different things. And I was like, well, I really loved ING Orange back when I opened that up. But then when Citi bought it, I closed those. And then I use Barclay for my long-term savings, my emergency fund, and my tax savings account. But I tend to use Wells Fargo, which I'm probably going to leave because of everything going on there. Just because it's such broadly accessible if I go across country or overseas.
Right.
It's really easy, but and then we have a money market. So this is one thing, because I like testing out lots of things personally. I don't like recommending something without testing it. So like I've tried Acorns and I've tried Betterment and I've tried, I try all these different apps. So I do end up with little bits of money in all these different things that I try. Do you do that too?
I do. I've tried to keep it fairly narrow, and I just recommend what I use because I know that I like it. But I do tend to have, I think now I bank with 3 institutions, and I have four investment accounts somewhere out there. Some of them are just like old 401ks, but I have like Stash, which is an account. You can invest in things that you just like believe in. It's kind of like Motif, if you use Motif.
I have Motif.
I just like to try these little things, and
yeah.
and now I have like $200 in it, and I can use it someday when I want to. But it's also hard with, getting all of those letters and being like, hey, accountant, here's like 1 cent that I might have made on this bank account.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
sure they love it, but I pay them. That's what they do.
So as an actuary, I'm just going to ask a quick question about an actuary. Is it a type of accountant? Were you an accountant, or is actuary separate from being an accountant?
Actuaries are separate from accountants. So I don't know much about like tax accounting. I took basic accounting in school. Actuaries mainly deal with statistics, and then they apply them to financial problems. So they tend to be the ones that set the rates on insurance. So we deal a lot with probability of mortality, which means we just look at a lot of like records that are dead and delete them from our database.
Right. So how likely I am to die within this time period. Yeah.
And I shouldn't just say mortality. It's more probability of failure, because you can be a property and casualty actuary, and then you look at, the insuring cars or insuring homes, and it's the probability of failure. So you just take a bunch of data from, maybe let's say Chicago. That's still way too broad, but they would take a bunch of data from Chicago and then look at all of the claims that are made on homes in Chicago. And that's kind of how they can determine my homeowner's rate that I pay, and my premium that I pay on my homeowner's insurance based on everybody else that lives here. And they do the same thing with car insurance, but they also look at, your gender and then if it's life insurance, they obviously look at if you're a smoker or a non-smoker. I actually worked in retirement. So I was looking at the probability of when people retire from their work, and then the probability that they die, and then figuring out how a company would be able to pay a person from retirement to death. So that they had enough money to pay their retirees. So
okay. Like
lots of probabilities, and then it's just financial equations.
That's cool. So now you can apply that to people's businesses, huh?
If they want, I can. But a lot of the skills come in from just like looking at numbers and being able to project out, and doing a lot of like amortization tables, and how is that debt really going to truly impact you this many years down the line. And we can look at like cash flow forecasting and whatnot. So it's a lot more of projecting into the future and making assumptions, but basing it all in kind of historical data.
I think cash flow projections is something that a lot of entrepreneurs need a better grounding in. Not to say everybody, but myself included, it's a hard thing, especially for people who do launches and have, multiple streams of income, trying to figure out how to fit it all together to get the cash flow that you want overall.
Right. And it all starts with like, how much do you need to live? And then you have to kind of back out of equations and then look at, if you're doing a $30,000 launch and it happens in August, how is that going to keep you afloat for the rest of the year until your next launch in February or something?
Right.
How does that impact you? And how do you like save for taxes with that? What do you have to do for that? So,
well, if you're doing the profit first model, you're taking it out of gross, your percentage of taxes. Yeah. That's great. Okay. So basically this episode is to tell people about this awesome service that Tess is offering for people, which I did not actually know you were becoming a profit first professional, but I may have to call you myself to start going through this. So if you guys are interested in this, if you've read Profit First, which is on my recommended reading list on my website, so I've referred lots of people to this book. It's a great book, and it is hard to implement. So Tess may be your gal. And I guess, are you focusing on millennials, or this is across the board?
This is across the board. It's entrepreneurs that have mainly service-based businesses or sell digital products.
Okay.
I can do more, but that's kind of my expertise.
Yeah, that makes it easier too, because having inventory and shipping and storage. which we deal with because we have a record label, and we've had a cattle ranch, which we're actually getting out of this year. After 14 years, we're leaving our cattle ranch right now. So that's been an interesting process for me, seeing how things that you have in your net worth estimation, when you actually liquidate them, the tax consequences and the way that things do not always sell at the price you expect them to sell or that you had in mind when you put that into your net worth equation. I'm learning a lot about that right now.
I think that's great. It's like any big kind of financial step or big life change, it always comes with a financial consequence, and you learn so much from it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have all this knowledge about cattle ranching. Dang.
That's true. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with that, but we do have some built up. So maybe I'll do a cattle podcast someday. I don't know.
You should be a cattle consultant.
Oh, I don't know about that. But anyway,
I just like the title.
A cattle consultant. I'm sure that there's some out there. I'll take a look around and see. But I
do have if any of your listeners or watchers want 5 free chapters, the first 5 chapters, they're like the core chapters of Profit First. I have that as a giveaway. It's at tesswicks.com/creative-profit-co.
Okay, that sounds great. And we're a bit past our time, and I got to go pick up my kids from school. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been great talking to you. Okay, bye-bye.
A lot of these limiting beliefs, that we kind of paper over now, like to be positive, they're not something that I've made up. They're real.